So yeah, just two Aspies here, two Aspie Yudkowskians debating P Doom, right?
I have a 99.999 maybe percent P Doom over the next 40 years. We've practically already lost this game unless something genuinely super unlikely happens.
Welcome to Do Debates. Today, my guest goes by the pseudonym Nethys. I originally met him when he commented on my YouTube channel. I've never seen him before in any other forum, but he's been unusually well-informed and insightful in my comments. So I invited him to come on the show, walk us through his thinking, even though he prefers to remain anonymous. I think he has a very interesting perspective and some insights that you guys are going to like. Hey, Nethys, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Laurent.
So tell us, where are you from?
I'm from the US, born and raised.
Fair enough. Don't want to get more detailed than that. And really quickly, what's kind of your life story and how did you first realize the concept of AI Doom? What was your exposure to it?
Gifted kid, read a lot, went to boarding school, started rambling about how everyone on Earth was doomed for various reasons because in the next 100 years, technological progress, increased power scale. I intuited that society wasn't ready for this kind of stuff. I pointed my finger at AI as being one source of this kind of problem, though at the time I would have also said, nanotech, asteroids, some sort of technological or just random accident that we weren't ready for. So I had a sense that the world was vulnerable and a set of crises were approaching. I started talking about AI more and more, and someone said, "Hey, have you ever read this Harry Potter fan fiction, Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality?" And I opened it up. I had a sort of religious experience reading it for the first time, or not a religious experience. I think I just stayed up for like 2 nights in a row trying to cram as much of it into my head in the first, 48 hours that I was exposed to this thing. And since then, I've been a Yudkowsky fan, broadly, LessWrong, all of that kind of stuff, and have just drilled more and more deeply into this topic of AI-sourced existential risk.
Yep. Nethys, you're kind of giving away the game when you say that you had a religious experience, because we often get the accusations that rationalists and doomers are a religious cult. But I definitely know what you mean, because when I personally started reading LessWrong, I didn't have a religious experience, but I was just like, wow, this is like better quality thinking than other rational people, right? Like it reminds me of like Richard Feynman and other like rationalist greats.
Yeah, I apologize for using contaminated language there. I would like to say like I have never been anything but an atheist as far as I remember. I mean, there are those childhood moments where you wonder if, something's organizing all of this stuff, something above you, and, maybe you pray or something like that. But I mean, even in elementary school, I was debating people about whether or not God is real. And I am firmly materialistic. I think we live in a universe with a regular causal structure with a bunch of hard edges down at every level. It's what happens just happens.
I agree. And I think that was Einstein's position, right? Even when he made reference to God, I think he was on the same page of like, look, it's just the universe. Like whatever the laws say happen is going to happen.
Yeah, I don't know specifically what was going on in Einstein's head when he thought about cosmology, but I think he had a vision of the universe as a mathematical object.
Yep. So back to your life story, it sounds like what I'm hearing is you kind of independently invented Nick Bostrom's vulnerable world hypothesis because you independently had the intuition of like, hey, we keep pulling balls out of the urn, right? We keep pulling new technologies out and they're really powerful. And eventually we're just going to hit on one that we can't handle. And did you independently think of that without reading Bostrom?
I hadn't read Bostrom at the time. I don't know the full process. Like, I had encountered Sam Harris before that, and he has read Bostrom and probably had read Bostrom before I encountered him. So there's probably some contamination of other ideas. It's really hard to pick apart, where things originated from, but it wasn't something where I was reading someone arguing for it and then came to that conclusion based on their arguments. It was very much looking at the world and seeing a picture of it as sort of in Carl Sagan terms, like we're just a little rock revolving in, I think he called it a sunbeam or something like that
Pale blue dot.
in his Pale Blue Dot speech. We're on this rock with this very thin blanket of atmosphere. It's like if you have an apple, the flesh of the apple would be the rock and the skin of the apple would be the atmosphere. And within this atmosphere and just like laid over the surface of the rock is this thready connection of chemical molecules that are doing very complex self-replicating things. And there's this like slime on the surface of the rock, and it's just hurtling through the void, hurtling through hard vacuum with radiation and all this kind of stuff. And it seemed fairly obvious that what humanity was doing was out of proportion to how vulnerable we were in that position.
I agree.
Yeah.
This is also called a spaceship Earth, right? Like we're all just
Yep.
living on the spaceship and like we have a life support system, but if that falls down, we're just in this inhospitable universe, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you're in your 20s right now, right?
Yep. Mid-20s.
Okay. And in terms of your Dune perspective, would you say you're mostly aligned with Eliezer Yudkowsky?
Yeah, I think Eliezer has a much clearer grasp of the intricacies of this stuff than I do. He's got a broader range of specific technical theories that he uses to generate the argumentation that he uses. I wouldn't say that I'm just parroting stuff that Eliezer says, but if you want a better perspective on this stuff, listen to Eliezer. Listen to him, read him, go really deep into it, and even if stylistically something doesn't click, just keep reading and try to extract the regularities in his arguments, the simple theories behind them that he's using to generate all of the other stuff that he says.
Absolutely. When you say neurodivergent, would you describe yourself as Asperger's?
Maybe. I don't know. I've never felt much problem socializing. Like it never became a self-consciousness anxiety sort of thing. I, have in the past had moments of social anxiety, like hesitating to engage with social interaction, but it was never like I was entirely ill-suited to it or didn't become a sticking point in my psychology. But I'm not normal. I talk like this basically all the time. I write the way I do basically all of the time. I run out ideas into these huge long chains of like explanation and explanations for the explanation and qualifiers and all this kind of stuff. And it's not a normal way that people relate to each other and can, sort of narrow down the number of situations you can insert yourself into easily.
It seems pretty common for like the less wrong rationality community to have those attributes. So yeah, whatever it is, it's not unheard of. So yeah, just two Aspies here, two Aspie Yudkowskians debating P. Doom, right?
I would like to say that I don't think this stuff is as complicated as it looks on the surface. I think it takes time to onboard, but I think the upside is when you actually get out into the world and try to apply it, it makes life simpler.
All right. You ready for the big question?
Yeah. Are you going to do the drop?
Hit it.
P-Doom, P-Doom, what's your P-Doom? What's your P-Doom? What's your P-Doom?
Nethys, what is your P-Doom?
All right. I thought about coming up with a specific number for this, but I figured I might as well wing it on the spot. I have a 99.999 maybe percent P-Doom over the next 40 years. I think actually if we go out to 40 years, maybe add another 1 or 2 nines in there. I think,
Okay, so greater than 99% P-Doom in the next 40 years, is that right?
yeah, I think substantially greater.
Wow. Okay, why do you have such a high P-Doom?
I don't see a good reason to not have such a high P-Doom. There's
Okay.
a lot of additional details there, but I am firmly in a camp that burden of proof is on the other side. That's not quite how I'd phrase it, but that's sort of the common language about this kind of stuff. I think,
Okay, sure. But
yeah,
what about the fact that we've survived all the new technologies so far? So how can you be so confident? Don't you think at least it should be more like 50-50?
it depends on, okay. The 50-50 thing is an anchoring point that is not well defined by the nature of this problem. Like if you
Yeah, so why is
anchor
the natural
yourself,
anchoring point more like 99%, right? Where do we start? Where is the reference class or the background estimate that we update from?
so the background estimate, the place we start out estimating from here is in the space of search processes that have a particular kind of character as being superhuman, as being better at steering the future than humans. How much do you need to specify the details of what those search processes are looking for in order for them to be aligned to humanity, in order for humans to be a step towards them or human values to be the thing that they're aiming for?
So I think you're basically giving me what some people are accusing doers of doing. Like it's become pretty popular to accuse an argument like yours of being just a counting argument, meaning you're kind of counting the possible AIs that you like, and then you're counting like all possible AIs, and you're being like, look, it's a small fraction, therefore our chance of a good future is low. Would you say you're just using a counting argument, or how is what you're doing better than that?
My argument is not a counting argument. My initial probability distribution does involve counting in that I'm trying to determine what space of outcomes over which I begin to apply updates to. So like, yes, the actual picture of what's going to happen in the future is going to be much narrower than just a spread over all possible configurations of computing hardware, because we're going to apply an optimization process to that computing hardware. I'm trying to put my finger on how much optimization power we need to use to configure that computer hardware in a way that gives us good outcome.
Now, to give you guys more context on Nethys's P-Doom, let's go to the YouTube comment that he wrote on my channel that originally made me want to invite him on the show.
Okay, so this was on a community post of yours where you said, overall, how aligned are you with LessWrong on AI Doom views? And I voted on that poll saying, agree with LessWrong greater than 70% of the time. And I further commented about my disagreement with you, or the disagreement that stood out to me at the time. I said, I think your P-Doom is unjustifiably low. I know you leave yourself a bit of a range in there, but frankly, it feels a bit like we're in the stands discussing a home team game where our side is down 100-0 with 2 minutes left on the clock. And you're saying, well, I agree we have less than a 50% chance of winning. More specifically, re-roll the dying with dignity post in your head, but swap out the April Fool's tone and content for a straightforward message about how to reason correctly about being in a dire situation. And just for some context here, dying with dignity or death with dignity or something like that was an April Fool's post by Eliezer Yudkowsky where he sort of, I think, first came out and said, things look pretty grim. And some of that post isn't him kidding. He says real things about how to reason under conditions where you have a really low probability of success. Okay, I continue. This isn't about defeatism or appearances. It's about getting a correct strategic view so you can actually have a world model that's as close to reality as possible, with which you can then make the correct decisions under some plausible but seemingly unlikely black swan events, which open up some narrow path to victory. This doesn't mean the universe is going to give us a black swan or 10, which open up narrow paths to victory. The main line still looks like getting nanomachined into fuel/spare parts for near black body solar collectors. But you're not fighting for the main line at this point in history. Even if everyone grokked it and we got an indefinite moratorium, we'd still have an uphill battle. You still lose more uphill battles than you win. Fighting uphill is a disadvantage. But the world where everyone wakes up tomorrow with the correct strategic picture on ASI is still a fictional world. Never mind that I didn't specify additionally in this hypothetical that everyone also has a correct view of the way their own values interact with this magically downloaded strategic picture. You just don't get any magic that turns around our culture at this point. Surviving worlds seem a lot more like World War I didn't happen, nor World War II. More smart people were alive in the 20th century. Vibes were better. Turing and others got the time and space to map out the correct strategic picture on AI development, and then we had 100 years head start over our universe's hardware scale-up to spend on becoming a species that can handle this. And even that doesn't seem insta-win if you think it through with a historically appropriate amount of pessimism. Parts of the horror in World War II might have been highly contingent on individuals making unique choices because of their own idiosyncrasies, but all the other horrors seemed pretty systemic in nature. We already weren't a species that was growing up quickly in a direction that'd be sufficient for this stuff. You know, maybe this world that diverged from ours in the 20th century also just happened to do better with lead contamination in the biosphere, so it had an extra billion IQ points and less lead damaged people by the time they got around to their 1970s, 1980s. Even that doesn't seem fully sufficient. This is a really long mental exercise, but it's the method I've found helpful for how to start seeing the game state we're in correctly. We don't live in that easier world. We have a pretty awful civilization. Almost no one really gets how bad of a situation we're in. This place is low trust, low wisdom, low happiness, low security, etc., 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 etc. And anytime you stumble into an uncertainty here, you have to perform the correct mental motion for integrating that uncertainty into your world model. So you don't make the uncertain on win or lose, therefore 50% chance I win the lottery mistake. That we are unsure of how things will specifically play out in the future doesn't invalidate having a bunch of nines in our PDoom. In this specific situation, most uncertainties are over spaces where 99.9 999% of outcomes are doom. Like uncertainty, about how the AI don't kill everyone policy battle is going to turn out. There are vanishingly few paths into the future where we get a sufficient amount of sane regulation backed by a sufficient amount of effort, since our global policy loading systems don't take neat instructions like don't build ASI and then spin those up into global order that does that effectively. Even the much easier von Neumann challenge of having a stable civilization where greater than one group has nuclear weapons, we are not doing well enough at that. Our civilization has a widespread and easily digestible meme about no winners in nuclear war, and we've yet to manage to create an equilibrium where nuclear war seems like something that can't happen. A slowly escalating or accidental nuclear war is a continuing risk because there are few international arrangements that drive that probability to near zero. And our civilization doesn't take correct strategic pictures as input and then output a process that steers us into those narrow, stable regions. So yeah, I disagree with your P-Doom. I haven't found a compelling reason to move the conversation about reasonable P-Doom values away from debates about how many nines you have in your 99.9 probability of doom. We've practically already lost this game unless something genuinely super unlikely happens. And yes, I could just be wrong about what is true about the universe, such that some part of my world model is wrong in a way that makes doom way less likely. And I should do a meta adjustment for humility. Except the precise amount of humility you take here is actually dependent on the plausibility of a truth about the universe that makes this easy, which has the same nature isn't here for you problem of expecting faster than light travel to be out there and be a physics feature that we can utilize in space travel. The universe we're in doesn't look like that. It doesn't look like FTL is going to work out that way, and it doesn't look like the alignment of an ASI is going to be easy for us. I'd be comfortable with a lot of nines in both propositions.
Nice, man.
Yeah, that's me just talking to you, trying to explain why I feel a little weird about saying 50% P-Doom at this point, or the start of the reasons why I feel a little weird about that.
To me, the easiest reason why I think P-Doom is lower than 99%, it's more like 50%, maybe 60, 70, 80, 90. Once you push P-Doom above 90, it just feels crazy to me because, like, don't you think, first of all, we might just not even build AGI? Don't you think there's like a few percent chance of that for a few decades? We just won't have AGI yet.
I am more tempted to go into what I would call sort of optimistic visualizations of the future, like internally. I'm not accusing you of this. I'm saying that as
No. And by the way, I'm just arguing for like a few percent here, right? I'm not saying you got to give me like a huge probability, but like you got to give me more than like 0.1%.
Yeah, maybe at 40 years, there's greater than 0.1% chance that we'll still be around just because we haven't built something like this yet. This isn't how it feels to me, and I think I have good enough reasons to convince me that things are going to happen sooner than that. But I also have much more humility in this area than other stuff because, you know, there's maybe, I don't know what the actual figure is from people who try to seriously estimate this stuff, but maybe a 0.1% chance that in that span of time we go into total nuclear war. And I think total nuclear war would genuinely disrupt the progress of AGI.
Right, which I personally think it's something like 1% a year to go into major nuclear war.
That might be the figure. That's fairly alarming if it is, but, you know, I haven't seen John von Neumann's worry about how stable this equilibria is. It hasn't been falsified yet. It doesn't look stable to me, even, you know, 100 years out or roughly 100 years out from when he was talking about this stuff.
Right. So when you say 99.999, it sounds like you've already conditioned on the assumption that we're going to have AGI, and also tech won't be disrupted by something like a nuclear war, right? So you don't even want to talk about, okay, because of those probabilities, maybe that makes AI doom only 90%, but you're just saying, let's condition on all that. It's more interesting to say, if we have AGI, then what's the P doom, right?
I think that's fair. And I think, I think me trying to sort of wiggle that through is a fair call out. And it isn't what Eliezer says, and I'm trying to say different things than just what Eliezer says. Eliezer says we're going to get there eventually.
That's not necessary to say different things than what Eliezer says. It's okay.
Yeah, and I think a sensible person in my position would just, pull up my favorite Eliezer blog posts and read it verbatim.
Right. Roman Yampolsky is the notorious research scientist who gives like a 99.999%. I think he's willing to extend the nines out as far as you like. So you're coming in a little bit lower than him, but I think in his case, he's not conditioning the way you are. I think he's just saying that's the probability that we'll eventually get doom, and he doesn't really talk about a timeline.
Yeah, I think what I was doing with putting that timeline there was giving more of the flavor of what I anticipate happening and what I strongly anticipate happening, and maybe adding a bunch of nines to what I strongly anticipate happening, within my lifetime is not the right approach here, because I am a silly little mortal and cannot reason over, amount of evidence, or cannot reason precisely enough with the amount of evidence that I have to give very confident answers about that.
Let's talk about living with a high P doom. What has been your experience since you realized you came to the confident conclusion that P doom was high?
It sucks. It doesn't suck all the time, but there's a lot of ways that people look at the world and feel like it's inadequate and feel like it's kind of doomed, but they have ways of lessening that emotional burden on themselves by hypothesizing a very distant future where everything's okay. I think some number of people who intellectually grasp that this is a very dangerous place that humanity is headed, and we're headed there pretty quickly, and it doesn't look good for us in our current shape. I think they still manage to keep that pretty abstract in their own heads and not really feel it impact their anticipations of future experience or things that were part of their emotional core. And I'm not a mind reader. I can't quite say this confidently, but it seems like there's a sense in which people aren't reacting strongly enough to this, that they don't really feel in their bones that this is a thing that's actually going to happen to us almost certainly. And, I think even if you feel a 20% chance in your bones, like, it's
well, I'm one of those people, right? Because I just don't really feel it on a gut level, right? So intellectually, I mean, I always say my P doom is high because I think the arguments make a lot of sense, right? I don't think we're building AI that we can control. I think intelligence is the most powerful thing, right? It's the key to power. You can put the animal in the cage purely based on intelligence, right? It can't put you in the cage. And similarly, I do think that an AI running loose on the internet that's smarter than us can essentially imprison us, do away with us. I totally intellectually buy all that. And yet, intuitively, I'm just expecting like the next tech release, right? Like, oh, OpenAI has another announcement. Oh, cool, they can do voice now, right? Like intuitively, I'm like, yeah, we're just going to keep getting these features. And yeah, some of them will be kind of dangerous, but maybe it'll like happen slow enough and they'll like somehow all be kept under control and it'll be fine. Like that's my intuition. But I think my intuition is wrong.
Yeah. And I think this is an important question because I think when people make decisions about what they're going to do in the future, a big part of the place they draw from is their sort of wordless, emotional anticipations about what sort of value they're going to experience in the future. Like, you know, do I pick this career path or this career path? Do I visualize myself in a big, beautiful house with a white fence and 3 kids? Do I visualize my grandchildren getting to do interesting things with their lives? Do I think the future of humanity is cool, or do I think it's scary? Um, and I think in order to motivate the correct decision making in a situation like this, you really have to feel that we are, walking towards an abyss, and a pretty dreadful abyss. There's a digression here about the game board that we're on, what we're playing for, what the very far future could look like in different configurations. I don't know if you want to get into that, but if you do, prompt me.
Yeah, sure. Tell me about the game board.
Okay. So there's a Bostrom paper and a paper by a guy named Toby Ord that talks about this, talks about the first concept I'm going to invoke here. The Bostrom paper is called Astronomical Waste, the Opportunity Cost of Delaying Technological Development. And the Toby Ord paper, which references the Bostrom paper, but goes into more of the calculations and models used to arrive at this picture of, civilization in the very far future, is called The Edges of the Universe. And the one part of both of these papers is, what is the size of the affectable universe from our perspective? Like, if we got our acts together and started on just sort of the very basic trajectory of building infrastructure in outer space, colonizing the solar system, colonizing other solar systems, von Neumann probes, which is a space probe that contains within it all of the prerequisites for building additional space probes given some resources. So you send it off to another star system, it lands somewhere, it builds more space probes, those launch. And the upshot of this is, for every year we delay leaving our solar system on a trajectory to colonize things as quickly as feasible, we are losing in our distant future light cone roughly 3 galaxies. So every year of delay, roughly 3 galaxies. This isn't, in terms of percentages, a lot of the galaxies we could affect in the very distant future. I think it's 1 part in 50 billion every year. Yeah, 1 part in
So
50
small
billion.
percentage. So you're kind of making the transhumanist or even the accelerationist case of like, hey, we really got to get a move on of building more powerful technology. And the other famous argument that even transhumanists believe, which I count myself as a transhumanist, is just like, hey, a lot of people are dying. Like, let's try to prevent death. Let's try to solve aging, and better technology can help us do that. So are you on the same page of like, yes, it is great to increase technology. It's just that some particular technologies are just going to run out of control?
Yeah, I don't think these things are opposed at all. I think I don't agree with the accelerationists in every domain, but when they point out a true thing, you can just say that's true, and then you can say, here are some additional details about the specific consequences of developing this technology in this way. But the game board that I see, and the thing that I try to tie my emotions to as tightly as I can, is, what is the fate of those very distant stars? Do we get there? Do we, delay a million years and lose 0.002% of them. And just to be clear, I'm talking about a delay of a million years and only losing that very tiny percentage of it. It's 3 galaxies per year. It's thousands of stars every second. If you make a decision that delays us getting there by even a second, you are losing humanity thousands of stars.
Right. And so, by the way, when we have these kinds of conversations about like, oh my God, we're losing thousands of stars, but it's still like less than 1 in a billion of all the value in the universe. And even something that's more closer to home, which is like, hey, people are dying. Like we know people who are dying, right? And that's actually a much more significant fraction of the Earth's population are dying, right? Something like 150,000 a day. When we have these kinds of discussions, and they're often brought up by the accelerationists being like, look, you got to develop technology, like the stakes are too high. Of course, the counter argument is to bring in the entire expected value equation. And there's a term in that equation saying the probability that you're going to save those lives as opposed to kill everybody.
Yeah.
And suddenly you see, the probability that we're going to kill everybody is very, very high. And as nice as it is to save all those lives, killing everybody forever with high probability really dominates every other term in the calculation, correct?
Yeah. I think you just try to do the expected value calculation and you try to apply the best principles you have for each term in that expected value calculation. I'm referencing one term here, which is the time it takes us to launch those space probes outside of our solar system. But that is a separate question than the question of what number of routes to that outcome end up going through dangerous territory or lethal territory. And another way you can lose all of those stars in the future is by going through lethal territory. And, Spaceship Earth, there are a lot of things that could kill all of us, and then you lose all the stars.
Exactly. Okay, so like when you talk about AGI, what do you think is like a good concrete way to describe AGI?
When you talk about definitions of things like AGI, we're trying to map something that's out in reality. And one of the stumbling blocks you run into is the different ways people interpret the semantics of the definition that you come up with. So a lot of people talk about AGI as being a system such that it can do every economically valuable task that humans can do. And that could mean a bunch of things and does mean a bunch of things to different people. I think when you say that to people, and I think this is true of a lot of people currently attempting to build AGI, they imagine something like a cluster of computers or even just a singular laptop that you could plug into a robot and have that robot, type on a typewriter or pull a lever in some kind of as part of the normal coordinated process that humans do to optimize our environment. That an AGI is something that fits into any of the roles that humans are a puzzle piece for. And I don't think there's a reason to imagine that sort of system is very distinguished in the space of all possible minds that we could build with the hardware we have on Earth. I think if you try to aim for that system, you end up with something very different that has the ability to do those things, not because it has, a shape such that it can fit into any of the puzzle piece shapes that humans make up to do their economically valuable work. I think it has a shape such that it could solve a vastly greater array of problems.
Right. I mean, I think we're definitely seeing that convergence, right? I mean, we're seeing people take like the same engines, the same training. I mean, I think the most recent example I heard was, physical intelligence, right? So they're taking these robots and they're being like, hey, look, we can just, in English, talk to the robot being like, hey, I want you to pick up that shirt and fold it. And like that English is actually helpful to translate that into command somehow, because it's like this one unified engine that's just able to process and predict just like all data in general, right? We're seeing this kind of unification.
I would be somewhat surprised if they did no fine tuning for that at all. Like if you just took a base model and somewhere in that base model's training process, it had run into the semantics for like manipulating actuators, and then you gave it an English language problem with some additional in the context window saying, these are the like, these are the actuators we have plugged into you. These are the different commands you can use to to tune those actuators, and then it just output an action policy that was able to pilot a robot.
Yeah, no, and I hear you, right? And I'm sure that at this stage they've got a lot of focused training going on, and they probably have like a different data set for like feedback on different actions. But I'm just saying more generally, right? We're seeing a convergence. Like, look, the same chatbot that is translating languages for you is also able to answer your math questions, right? Answer your questions about plumbing, right? And it's the same chatbot. They didn't even
Yep.
train separate chatbots. They're just like, yep, throw more data in, like, will it blend? Kind of like that. And you're seeing multimodal models, right? So the fact that even just images, right? The fact that you can tell it something to draw in English and give it feedback in English, and it can convert what you're saying in English to the pixels that it's drawing. Like we're definitely just seeing everything kind of falling into this black hole. Like, yeah, the models just want to learn. Like this architecture where we're just like seeing, unsupervised learning. We're just seeing a bunch of examples, predicting the next example, feeding it back into all these weights. And then there you go. Like it's just a giant brain that understands everything, right? Like we're just seeing this unified architecture.
Yeah. And I think the thing is that there are many things you could imagine happening as you train these things. And I think a lot of this was discussed with things like neural networks. You have things like overfitting and all that kind of stuff where it learns very specific slices of these problems as they're represented in the training data. But what we are observing as these things are being, refined by these laboratories is that there does seem to be a deep pattern here of the things, the internal algorithms discovered by these labs through training these things fall into an attractor basin of very simple algorithms that generalize to a broad variety of problems. And if you push that hard enough such that the thing can do every economically valuable task, I think you've created something vastly superhuman. Not just, a general purpose, human imitator. I think you have something that is a general purpose problem solver such that its problem domain goes way beyond what even human civilization is collectively able to optimize for.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay. Why don't you think the AI companies' alignment efforts will keep working as AI becomes more intelligent?
Okay. This gets into how much you need to constrain the different outputs that these systems could have. Like, what do we mean by alignment? And what sort of inner mechanisms go into something like that? I think from a human perspective, sort of from a naive human perspective, we have an intuitive sense that the stuff we do is simple, that there's this sort of anthropomorphizing kind of intuition inside of us that somehow what we're doing is very distinguished in reality, that our values form a natural abstraction, that other things that have characteristics like us, like intelligence, are going to also have other features that we have. And I think there's a lot more detail than that. I think there's a lot more specificity that you need to target the thing that humans are doing to the world, the thing that we're optimizing for in the very far future. I think things like launch a solar probe beyond the solar system as quickly as possible are not very distinguished. Those are pretty overdetermined by the shape of the universe, like the way these distant galaxies are receding from our affectable horizon implies that you want to send part of the material in a very ordered condition such that you can begin optimizing things further and further away in order to get more matter and energy. I think all that requires is having some use of that much matter and energy. The thing that you do with those galaxies, the things that you do with that matter and energy, what you do along the way in getting to those galaxies is not very determined. There are some instrumental considerations that are probably going to play a big part in the shape of whatever process claims those very distant galaxies. Like, there are efficiencies in the way you can use matter and energy that would probably be arrived at by a very wide array of search processes, like things like superconductors, or things like particular ways of transferring heat energy that are, there's some boundary of efficiency there where a wide variety of search processes, whether it be humans working at science for a long time or a vast array of different super intelligences trying to optimize their own particular value systems over those very distant galaxies. Like, the space probes might look pretty similar from, in these many worlds of different types of super intelligences that we build. But the thing the space probes are trying to accomplish is a much larger configuration space. And
Right.
human values are complicated. There's complicated machinery behind why we value things the way that we do. Caring about other people involves complicated brain machinery. And that doesn't seem overdetermined as a place a lot of different intelligences would end up. I'm rephrasing some things here that other people have said, but hopefully there's, some value in just hearing me say it as well.
Yeah, I think so. One thing that strikes me about you, Nethys, is you don't have traditional credentials. So, neither does Eliezer Yudkowsky. You're just a smart guy writing on the internet who I feel like is making good points. And you actually have some views being in that position of why it makes sense that people like you should still have something to contribute. So tell me more.
Well, I'm not going to speak for everyone's decision-making process here. You can use the heuristics you use. There is a valid argument for gatekeeping intellectual conversations. I think the way I would push back at this is saying you have to have an exception handling procedure. And the reason is the specific heuristics that you're using when you're deploying credentialism or those kind of things are lossy compared to the actual things that you value as consequences of letting people participate in a conversation. If you notice someone saying something that sounds like it makes sense to you, that sounds like it has a coherent thread of argumentation, valid argument steps, even if they haven't listed sources, haven't listed any of that kind of stuff, if it sounds reasonable to you, either one of two things is happening. Either they've delved far enough into this topic to Goodhart past Goodhart's curse, when a target becomes a measure, it ceases to be a good target. Either they've Goodharted past your heuristics about what arguments sound like they make sense, or they're actually making an argument that makes sense. And if you notice a random YouTube commenter doing something like that, you can skip over the step of asking whether they have the credentials, that kind of stuff, and just investigate your own internal ability to decide which arguments make sense. Because either there's a flaw in that or someone is saying something that you should listen to. I think in the computer programming fields, one of the sort of innovations of the corporate culture was to stop caring about credentials and instead just try to directly measure the merits of each individual contributor.
Yeah, and I think listeners to my podcast respect Eliezer Yudkowsky, even though he doesn't even have a high school degree, for God's sakes. And I think they respect Goran. I don't even think Goran has any degrees.
I don't think Goran would tell you. Goran,
Yeah, exactly. He may or may not. Yeah.
yeah,
He doesn't flat whatever degrees he has.
yeah, and just I've read a bit of Goran. I haven't read enough of Goran to even guess how much he's written, but I go on Goran.com like once a month or something and just check out an article from there.
All right, Nethys. So to recap, you basically have a very Yudkowskian position, which is similar to my own. You're projecting forward. You think we're going to get AGI. You see a lot of different outcomes where the AGI just optimizes for some future that's not what we want. You're not optimistic about alignment. And so you just have a very high P-doom and it sucks. Is that a good recap, or what would you add?
I'm additionally not optimistic about the societal response. I don't think we have mechanisms in culture, governance, all that kind of stuff that are going to respond to this in the very precise way that would let you escape almost certain doom.
Okay, so last question. What do you think viewers of Doom debates can do that's productive?
Read more about the topic. I think that's a good way to start on any path to being more productive about this kind of stuff, is just saying fewer things that are nonsense, saying fewer things that have been refuted before, saying fewer things that are based on invalid argumentative steps, making it so that less people have to retread ground in these kind of conversations.
What about the PauseAI movement?
I think they're doing great. First of all, I not just saying this is like turning on my political brain and these people are my allies.
Can we just do this again? And can we do it again? Let's do it tighter. How about I ask you the question again on what's productive, and then you say, well, first of all, get informed, like read Eliezer Yudkowsky, make sure you're contributing to the conversation, and then also check out PauseAI. Are you willing to give an answer like that?
Maybe.
Okay.
I struggle to be a joiner. I struggle to I do want to get behind the thing that's getting the closest, which I think is PauseAI. But when I imagine myself doing something like that, it feels like a betrayal of some part of my personality that has refused to call myself, Democrat, Republican, Socialist, Communist, and any of these kind of labels.
Everybody, Eliezer, remember our kind can't cooperate. Remember the Eliezer article?
I do. That was a whole part of the sequences. It was a whole sub-thread in the sequences about matching the output of Catholicism, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, I've read that. It resonated with me, but also there's something that just tries to drive me towards pointing at that and saying, great, but do a few things differently.
Right. Well, I thought that this was kind of a funny turnaround where when I asked you, what do you think of PauseAI, you seemed very positive on it. And then when I'm like, okay, so how about just tighten up your answer and say, check out PauseAI. And you're like, whoa. You're very resistant.
Yeah. I think it's easier to say something nice when I think part of what I was imagining there was me just coming out and saying, hey, check out PauseAI, as implying that I had any involvement in it, implying that I had looked into it deeply. I have read very little about PauseAI. I have heard some of their slogans. I've seen some of their protests that they've organized, not in person, but my main reaction to it is they are doing something good and that they are directionally better than any other like political movement on this topic that I've seen. But but there needs to be an inclusion of the actual points that we are on a very dangerous course. The concrete details of the dangerous course that we're on, like how to get people in government that actually grasp the strategic picture of the situation that we're in, not just feeding government a slogan. Like when you feed government a slogan like women's suffrage, there are established conceptual frameworks for how to do something like suffrage. They know how to write those bills. They know how to push them forward. They know what clauses they need to include, what the actual mechanisms of creating that policy will do. I think if you're going to have a movement with a slogan about pausing AI, there needs to be quite a lot of strategically informed detail in the tactics that you use to get that movement forward. And you can't just give government a slogan, can't just give them a visible push for taking this stuff more seriously. You have to have a very specific thing that you want them to do as a result of that. And that specific thing that they need to do is just too long to just send them that. You need to send them a more compressed version that involves, what situation are we really in?
That makes sense. And I understand what you mean about how you haven't looked deeply into PauseAI. You don't know all the details. So it's possible that you wouldn't like some of the details. So that's why jumping to being like, join PauseAI.
Yeah.
It feels like you're not ready to do that, even though from what you've seen, you like it, right? So that's kind of how we can reconcile the two responses.
Yeah. I'd rather respond to a question about, what do you think of PauseAI and say, looks good from what I've seen so far, but just having PauseAI come out of my mouth as something that, as something I'm presenting as coming from an internal, well-reasoned, pros and cons sort of perspective on PauseAI is a little weird for me. But
all right, viewers. Well, if you want to join PauseAI or just check it out, see what kind of projects we're doing, what kind of topics we're discussing, you can go to pauseai.info, click the link to join the Discord. Worst case, you just get to join a really cool Discord community and just have cool people to chat with. I recommend it. There's even a channel called #Doom-Debates, and I'm in there too. So that's actually the official Doom Debates Discord is actually a channel within PauseAI. So there's another reason to just check it out and get involved. Cool. All right. Yeah. So Nethys, I just want to thank you for being a really good YouTube commenter, really distinguishing yourself with that quality comment, and then agreeing to come on and chat with me in more detail. That's been great to have you.
Yeah, no problem. It was fun. Thank you for having me.
All right, viewers. Thanks for watching Doom Debates. Now stay tuned. I want to share with you another clip from this video. It's made by my friend Michael. He calls himself Lethal Intelligence, and he has this amazing video that he spent more than 1,000 hours on to really lay out the entire AI Doom argument, complete with really good animations. This clip is an overview of the concept of agency. It's talking about how once we make chatbots a little bit smarter so they can just get a little bit better at answering questions about what's a good plan of action to do next, then it's pretty simple to go from smart planning chatbots to agents. So it's making the really good point that agency isn't this fundamental barrier. The dangerous part of an agent AI isn't the fact that it's an agent. It's the fact that it knows what to do. Once you know what to do, it's just a trivial step to be like, hey, can you help me do this? Just do exactly what I say, go. That part is actually relatively easy. So this video does a good job putting that out to the layman. Check it out.
Currently, AI commercial projects of today mainly operate as conversational chatbots. They are tools waiting for a user input in order to produce an output. They do not have any agency or long-term memory. They can be used, for example, as a creative device to make art, a business tool to generate professional content, or an efficient replacement for a search engine, an oracle that can provide an answer to any question. The fast-approaching AGI we should be seriously worried about, though, will not be a reactive tool waiting for the next prompt. It will be operating as a deliberative agent. Such an agent will be bootstrapped with a set of primary objectives and will be released to interact with our environment in real life, figure out sub-goals on its own, break them down in steps, and use real-time feedback of the impact its actions make in the real world to update. The inner workings of such an agent will be using something like the AI chatbot of today as a building block. It's a surprisingly simple design that combines prompt responses from a ChatGPT-like tool with a feedback loop where the responses are stored, processed as instructions outside, and the result is fed back to it for the next question. One can visualize it as a machine with two parts. One is the ChatGPT-like oracle, and the other functions as a management component. The manager takes the primary objective from the human as an input. For example, make me rich. The manager part then prompts the oracle.
Give me a step-by-step plan for how to get rich.
The oracle responds.
Here is a plan with 2,000 steps.
The manager connects with the APIs, executes the first step, and returns to the oracle.
My goal is to become rich, and I have this plan of 2,000 steps. I executed the first step and I got these results. Give me the new plan.
The oracle processes the plan it gave before, together with the current status of things, and responds.
Here is an updated plan with 1,982 steps.
The manager connects with the APIs, executes the next step, feeds the results back to the oracle prompt, and repeats. This cycle can keep going on and on for as long as it needs, until the goal is achieved. If you zoom out, a very capable chat tool combined with a feedback loop becomes a very powerful agent, potentially able to achieve anything. It can self-prompt and produce every necessary step required to complete any task. To turn the oracle, a reactive tool, into an autonomous agent is not a complicated architecture. In fact, it already happened multiple times, almost immediately after the release of the GPT. Open source projects like AutoGPT, BabyAGI, and ChaosGPT spawned fast within weeks and started running in the wild. The only reason these first prototypes have not disrupted everything and aren't dominating the headlines yet is because this combo is just very early stage. The oracle part is still early version, and the actions it can take, the hooks it has into the internet and the real world, are also very new and currently under development. But things are moving with breakneck speed. And most experts agree that it's quite probable that the real thing, the really clever general AI agent that's executing its goals in the world autonomously will arrive to Earth very, very soon.
If you're just listening to the audio of this, you really should go on YouTube and check out the Lethal Intelligence Guide, the video version, because the animations are so painstakingly crafted and there's so much good stuff in there. They tell a lot of the story visually. And again, this is really just the highest quality AI Doom explainer I've ever seen. So props to Michael from Lethal Intelligence. Everybody click the link in the show notes. Let's get Lethal Intelligence some new subscribers. That's it for today's episode. Remember to head over to YouTube and smack that subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, leave us a comment. Let me know what you thought of the episode. And I'll see you right back here very shortly on Doom Debates.